On today's episode of The Front Row, we are in the downtown studios of Lubbock Public Media in the Art and Cultural District here in the city of Lubbock. And our special guest today on the program is Chuck Lanehart. And we're very, very happy to have you on the show. Thank you for being with us today.
I appreciate it.
Great. Let me begin by asking a little bit about you, where you grew up, where you went to school, and how you laid the foundation for what you do today.
Native Texan, born Abilene, Texas. Moved to Pampa with my family, and I graduated from Pampa High School. Went to college at Angelo State for a couple of years, decided to change majors. Moved to Texas Tech, majored in journalism, and I learned to write. I was a journalism major, worked for the University Daily, now the Daily Toreador. Graduated in '74, went to work for the San Angelo Standard-Times for a little bit during the Watergate era. It was a lot of fun. I thought of myself as a muckraker, but I was actually an obituary writer. And anyway, I had applied for law school, didn't really expect to get in, but I did, and went to Tech Law. Graduated in '77, got a job with an old lawyer named Byron Chappell, and that's the only job I've ever had. The firm is now called Chappell, Lanehart, and Stengel, and we're criminal defense lawyers. So, primarily what I do is represent citizens accused of crime, but I've always enjoyed writing, and in 1987, I was given an old photograph by someone, and it was a picture of a bunch of old guys standing in front of an old jail, and they were all, cowboys wearing boots and hats, and one of them had an eye patch, and one of them had a cigar, and I thought, and then I looked on the back of this old photograph, and it said, "This is a photograph of the jurors and trial officials in the very first murder case in Lubbock, Texas, State versus Taylor, 1913. And I said, well, what the heck is that? And I started researching that particular case. It turned out to be a very interesting case. And I wrote an article about it, and I just continued writing about legal history over the years. And then in about 2017, the Lubbock Avalanche Journal started a series called Caprock Chronicles, which is all about history. It runs every Sunday about all different kinds of local history on the Caprock, the Llano Estacado. And I was asked to write an article about that particular case, which I did, and they said, well, this is good. Can you write some more? And I did, and I wrote quite a few articles about legal history in and around Lubbock. And then COVID came around, and the courthouse was essentially closed, and I was, cooped up in my office or at home, and I just decided, gosh, I'll just keep writing, and it doesn't even have to be about legal history. And I started writing about cultural history as well, and all different kinds of history, actually, that affect those of us who live in the Llano Estacado.
Right. Well, I just find it fascinating. I've read a couple of your articles, one of which has to deal with the early history of what eventually became the Lubbock Symphony, but it had humble beginnings in a different kind of way, and I learned a lot that I didn't know, and I was really grateful about that. And then a coworker of mine chimed in to say how much he respected you and your work, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show today. So tell me, when did you sort of realize that writing was interesting to you? Was that as a child?
Well, my mom was a great storyteller. And, she told stories about everything. And, my dad always kidded her and said, that's a great story. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's a great story. So I guess that's probably where my inspiration came from, was just storytelling. And then I had some great teachers, in high school and college that, inspired me to write. Right. And I've always been a reader. I read a lot of books.
And you're a credentialed journalist as
Yes,
well. So,
yes.
things. So tell us, what are some of the really interesting things that you found out historically about West Texas?
Oh my Lord. Well, the legal history is very interesting. This first murder case was about a cop, a city cop actually, who shot and killed 2 unarmed men in a bar. And reading about it in the court records, one little blurb in the local newspaper back then about it. But reading the court records, he seemed to be a lot like Barney Fife, and these two drunks in a bar, they decide they're gonna, give him a hard time. Well, he pulled his gun out and shot and killed them both. Stood trial for murder, and he was acquitted.
Gosh, wow.
Even before that, probably the most interesting story about Lubbock and the law is the case of Jim Jarrett. And I researched a book. I was not the author. I wrote the foreword to it, called Death on the Lonely Llano Estacado. It's about the death of Jim Jarrett in 1903. It was the very first homicide recorded in this part of the country. And he was a lawyer, Jim Jarrett. Jim Jarrett was a lot like Stephen F. Austin. Stephen F. Austin brought all the first Anglo settlers into what is now Texas, and Jim Jarrett brought a lot of the early settlers into the Lubbock area and the South Plains area. People from Central Texas, where he was from. And he settled them on some ranch land that was available from the state of Texas under the the Four Sections Act, I guess it was. Yeah, the Four Sections Act. And, this property to the west of Lubbock, Hockley County, Terry County, Cochran County, called the Strip, was available for settlers who would promise to pay for it at very easy terms as long as they lived there and worked the land. And he settled all these small farmers and small ranchers on this property, 25 families. And anyway, the ranchers who were already using that property free for grazing, big ranchers, corporate ranchers, they didn't like it. And they filed lawsuits against all of these settlers, and Jim Jarrett, being a lawyer, defended all of them. Finally won in August of 1903, finally won all of these lawsuits, which had to be litigated in far-flung places because, Lubbock didn't, there wasn't any way that they could litigate this kind of lawsuit in the small counties around here. Anyway, he won in August of 1903. Next thing you know, he's dead. And long story short, he had been assassinated by one of the worst assassins, more deadly than Billy the Kid. And the assassin was paid by one of the big ranchers to do it. And there's a very good book about it called Death on the Llano Estacado.
So murder plays a big part. You have written a book about a murder that took place at Texas Tech back in the 1960s.
Yeah.
My mom was going to school at that time, and I remember that she was scared to death when this whole thing went down. And you've written a book about it.
Yes, I have. It's called Fatal Exam, Solving Lubbock's Greatest Murder Mystery. Alan Burton is my co-author, and it was a really, really interesting case. So Benjamin Locke was a student at Texas Tech, and he wanted to make good grades, so he decided that the best way to do that was to steal test questions from professors' offices. And one day he was in the science building stealing test questions that were coming up, and a cleaning lady, a janitor, caught him, and he decided to kill her. And he grabbed a scalpel and killed her with a scalpel and used a bone saw. This was close to a laboratory in the science building. Used a bone saw to almost decapitate her. She died. He ran off. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no surveillance like we have today.
Right.
And it was a huge case. Everyone was scared to death. It took a long time to settle the case, and that's another story about how to solve the case, and that's another long story about how the case was solved. But eventually he was caught after a James Bond-like car chase and foot chase, and he was convicted. And the strange thing is, during this period of time, there was a moratorium on the death penalty. The Supreme Court was considering whether the death penalty was legal or not, and so there was no. They did not attempt to have him tried for capital murder, but he was convicted of murder, and he was given a 40-year sentence, I believe. He was a model prisoner, edited the prison newspaper, was involved in the prison rodeo, taught other prisoners how to read and write, and he was paroled after 15 years. And he's still living. He's in Massachusetts somewhere.
Wow, that's amazing. Goodness. Well, not everything that you've done is murder.
Right.
And you're still writing currently to this day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you said you also had branched out into art, culture, and other things. You find that interesting as well?
I just finished an article about the history of the chicken fried steak. I write. I like, I write about food. Music is my passion.
Yeah.
I just love music, and so I did write a couple articles that were recently published in the AJ about the history of music and music venues,
Yeah.
and also a little bit about the musicians that have come through here.
Right. I'm glad to hear you say that, because I remember growing up a lot of places which no longer exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be fascinated to read that. And that brings me to the point that for folks who would like to access your material and the things that you've written, how is the best way to do that?
Google.
Okay. All right.
You can just Google Caprock Chronicles and my name. You have to have a subscription to the AJ to read more than a couple of articles, I think, so that's problematic. I post all of my stuff on Facebook, so you can look at Chuck Lanehart Facebook page, and you can see all of my articles there. And of course, you can buy my book.
Right.
I have 3 of them that are full of all different kinds of stories about the history of the Llano Estacado.
Right. And I see that you got a foreword by Monty Monroe. That's great. That's certainly an endorsement. That's great.
Right.
Excellent. Great. Well, what sort of things do you see in the future? Are there any things coming up that you are going to be writing about currently?
What's coming up that hasn't been published? I've written several articles that have not yet been published. I wrote a 2-part history of Dirk West.
Oh, right.
And of course, Dirk West was a man of many hats.
Yeah.
That's the title of the thing, because he wasn't only just a cartoonist. He was mayor of Lubbock. He was one of the early pioneers of Lubbock television. He was a chili chef. I wrote a couple articles about him. I wrote a couple articles about E.J. Holub,
Mm-hmm.
famed, college football player for Texas Tech. That hasn't yet been published. I've written a lot. I should have brought my list of articles that are coming up, but I've written quite a few.
Well, unfortunately, we're just about out of time. I'd actually entertain the idea of maybe doing a part 2 at some point to get to know a little bit more about this, because I find this really fascinating, and I know our listeners do as well. So thank you very much for being our guest. On the show today, we've been talking with Chuck Lanehart, who is an attorney here in town, but one of the things he loves to do is write articles on history about the area, legal history, cultural history, food history, all of it. Thank you so much for being our guest on the show today.
I appreciate it. I'd love to come back.